I'm here because I am a roaring lion crying out righteousness. I want to explain to you the predication of the ATLAH Church, that is the associate church of ATLAH, filing a multi-million-dollar religious persecution suit, primarily naming Mayor Eric Adams and the city of New York and the Department of Finance and the Mellon Bank of religious persecution under the Federal Code 42 USC 1983, which is a civil rights federal code that protects, that responds to protected constitutional rights. Let me tell you why we're going to do this. Now that the news has broken that Mayor Eric Adams is embroiled in potentially what will be his downfall of having taken bribes or kickbacks or did a quid pro quo with the Turkish government to get their consulate established here in New York City while he was borough president of the borough of Brooklyn, that he took money, kickback money. And this has been an ongoing investigation. And the FBI stopped and frisked him on Wednesday of last week, took his cell phone, took his devices, his iPad, and they have examined it. Here's what I want to say to you, and here's what I'm going to prove in court. I'm going to prove in court that the Mellon Bank and Eric Adams are in the same dirty bed, and it's not even a king-size bed. I'm going to prove in court. Now listen to Pastor Manick very carefully. I'm going to prove in court that Eric Adams threatened the Mellon Bank and their predatory, discriminatory, unjust tax principles and foreclosure principles in New York City that have been going on for years. And the Mellon Bank has gotten filthy rich by taking people's property. I'm going to prove in court that the Mellon Bank and Eric Adams were in cahoots, that there was a kickback from the Mellon Bank to Eric Adams, asking him to assuage or slow down on his policies regarding destroying the New York tax lien law. But more specifically, where the religious persecution comes in, is that when Eric Adams was informed that the ATLAH Community Church, which is our sister church here in Harlem, was under a massive draconian torture tax lien law foreclosure, Eric Adams did not lift his finger to go against or to oppose the Mellon Bank because of future dealings that they had when he was running for the office of mayor. I'm going to prove it in court. First of all, that there was a contractual relationship. But let me put it to you this way. Eric Adams said when he was running for the mayor of the city of New York that he was going to create policies that would stop the banks from foreclosing poor people's property. And he was going to close the gap on the wide disparity of rich and poor people. I want you to listen. This is before Eric Adams became mayor. And when the Mellon Bank heard this, they offered him campaign financing. But first, just, Mr. Engineer, roll that clip, if you will, please.
I'd like to ask you about taxes while you're here with us, Eric. A Bloomberg News investigation found wide disparities when it comes to property taxes in the city. I wonder, if you were the next mayor, would you work to even the playing field there to make that system more fair for residents?
We must do it. It has been far too long. It was ruled by the courts that this property tax system is unfair. It is hurting outer borough property owners, one and two family homeowners. We must have a fairer system, and I believe it should be done immediately. It is my desire to get this resolved within the first year. Let's put together a task force that sits down and come up with real recommendations and solutions. It is unfair and has been unfair for far too long.
Now, what you just heard the mayor candidate at the time say is that the courts have ruled that the tax lien law that has created this $4 million foreclosure, assault, and torture against our church was unfair. The courts have ruled that. Now, of course, when I filed my personal complaint against the city of New York, they have never argued that the tax lien law was just. They've never argued that, but you heard him say it. And you heard him also say, once he becomes mayor, he's going to move swiftly to eradicate the law and then reach out to help people who are struggling with this unjust tax law and taxing of poor people. Well, here's what happened. As Mayor Adams is now under investigation of the Turkish government who wanted to establish a consulate here in the New York City area, and in Brooklyn in particular, so they could have a representation. Turkey, everybody wants a place in America, a house in America. And they built a building, but it wasn't being built appropriately fast enough. Eric Adams stepped in as the mayor, as the borough president of Brooklyn, and pressured the fire department to issue a permit for the Turkish building to go forward and for the Turkish diplomats to inhabit it. It was illegal. It was an unjust procedure. And what we believe we're going to find out is that there was a kickback given to campaign financing, along with perhaps a whole lot of other things. It is reported that Eric Adams traveled to Turkey 6 times. 6 times. Why would you go to Turkey? I mean, you go Africa maybe, but Turkey 6 times. Here's what I'm going to prove in court. Listen to Pastor Manning very carefully. Here's what I'm going to prove in court. The reason why we are being persecuted, and we will file under the 42 USC 1983 federal code of protected rights, is that we are being persecuted, religious persecution, which Eric Adams thought was sufficient for him to ignore our pleas for help to stop this, because he had the power to stop it. He had the power to call up the president of the Mellon Bank and say, get your filthy hands off of that church up there in Harlem that has served over 1 million meals to hungry bellies. Get your filthy blood-sucking hands, Robin Vance. Get your filthy blood-sucking hands, James Meeks, off of that church that has educated over 500 children that have been accepted at Yale, at Juilliard, at Cardozo, at New York, at New York University, Fordham, St. John's, a host of them. Get your filthy hands off of that church that has run a homeless shelter for more than 40 years. Get your filthy blood-sucking hands off of that church that has never taken a dime or a dollar from the city or the federal government to run its programs, to run its school, to run his breakfast program. Get your filthy hands off of throwing that church and those children out into the street as homeless. Eric Adams could have done that, but he didn't. And why? He didn't do it. Number one was his relationship with the Mellon Bank. Let me show you something. Mr. Engineer, do you have the the foreclosure auction list for tomorrow? Do you have it? Okay. If you look at the auction list, raise it up, Mr. Engineer. The auction list of properties that are going to be foreclosed on tomorrow, November the 15th, you will see that the Bank of New York Mellon versus Dasik Crescended, it's been ordered that property be sold. Now, the Mellon Bank, I get these every week. Usually the Mellon Bank is 2 out of 3. Every week the Mellon Bank is involved. The Mellon Bank makes more money off of grabbing properties for just a few nickels and dimes and then selling it for multi-million dollars. Wanted to demonstrate that to you. Here, that's number one. But number two is that Eric Adams did not come to our aid. First of all, because he would have had to ask the Mellon Bank to give up $4 million that they can get for our church. Now, the church is the building's worth a whole lot more than that. That's number one, and they'd already made a deal that he wasn't going to stop the taxes. Eric Adams should have, listen to this, Everybody who got an ear. Maybe you hate me. Maybe you want to see me fail. Maybe you want to see this church be thrown in the street. Maybe you want to see our children homeless. Maybe you want to see the homeless shelter sleeping in the street. Maybe you want to do that. But listen to me. Listen to me. Eric Adams understood that by threatening to wipe out a major source of income called the tax lien law, that there would be people who would try to stop him from that legislation from going forward. And even though he has been mayor and have known about the fact that our church has been under this persecution for years, has never once picked up the phone, has never once sent one of his aides to call to find out what be the matter and how can he help. We were down in August of 2022. We were on the city steps in the mayor's office asking him for help, but he did not come out to speak to us. I was out there with all our school children, but he did not come out to help us. The reason being, the next reason, of course, that financially, he thought that because there's such hatred for me from the LGBT community, from the liberals, from the leftists, from the haters of the word of God, because I'm a true preacher. I've been doing this for 40 years. I've worked in this community for 40 years. I've fed the hungry. I've clothed the naked. I've housed the homeless. I've followed the Bible. They just don't like the word of God that tells them, listen, people would rather side with people who want to have unbiblical authorized sex than side with a pastor who says that it's unbiblical, unauthorized sex. At any rate, Eric Adams, a part of our second and perhaps third suit in federal court against Eric Adams, against the city of New York, and against the Mellon Bank will be that they have persecuted us. In other words, that they're looking at my religious beliefs as antithetical to their beliefs and their desires. And so to shut down my religious voice, to shut down my religious position, take the church and shut me down. And they have been threatening, having court hearings, filings that have threatened and that have persecuted our church for 20 years. Now, Eric Adams wasn't there in the beginning, but he's picked up the mantle. I want you to be able to see that. One final thing. A local politician, when he was an assemblyman in the state of New York named Keith Wright, gave a statement to the New York Times. And we're going to use this also in our next one or two court cases that we're going to bring against Eric Adams. And I'll tell you this as well. Mr. You'll bring up that article. I'll tell you this as well. The fact that it can be proven that Eric Adams takes kickbacks or Eric Adams takes illegal campaign funds. I'm going to demonstrate that he took illegal campaign funds from James Meeks and from Robin Vance and from the Mellon Bank. I'm going to prove it in court. I'm going to prove it in court that he took campaign funds from the Mellon Bank to go easy on wiping out that, if you will, cash cow called the tax lien law. And it was and has been a cash cow. You buy a tax lien for $20,000 or $36,000 from the city, maybe you pay $20,000 for it, and then sit on it, which is in the legal terms is called latches. You sit on it for several years, let the interest grow, and then foreclose for $2 million. You only paid $20,000, but now you sat on it, a legal term called latches, bring it to court before the limit of statute of limitations expire. Now it's up to $2 million from just the $20 million. That's a cash cow. And everybody's making money and poor people are getting poor. Eric Adams has been at the heart and center of this. So when I saw what was happening here, I knew this was going on, but didn't have an entree in to demonstrate it. I'm ready to go to town. We got at least 2 more lawsuits coming. That's right. But listen, one of the local politicians, what he said about me, his name is Keith Wright. The New York Times did an ugly article about me being an outspoken pastor. It's in the New York Times, and they wrote a whole lot of things. Listen, you can scroll it. I don't know if you can. And I don't know if we can find Keith Wright's statement, whether Keith Wright was interviewed. He was a local assemblyman, a local politician, and stated that, he was glad, in effect, he was glad that the church was being foreclosed and that the school and the homeless shelter and the people were being kicked to the curb. He said he was glad about it. That's right there in the New York Times. Maybe he and Eric Adams had some, if you will, confab about this. I want to express that to you. I want you to know that we're moving forward. I'm asking for your prayers. Now, here's the issue. On the religious persecution of James Manning, I can file that pro se. But on the religious persecution of the ATLAH Church, I'm going to need an attorney. And maybe I can get an attorney that will work with me on contingency. That is to say, if we sue for $100 million, he'll get $25 million. Maybe. I'm going to see. I'll find out. But on my end, I may need to ask you for some retainer funding to get an attorney. And if you can help with that, I don't know exactly who the attorney will be or what a retainer fee, or maybe there'll be no retainer fee. He may say, listen, Pastor Manning, you got a rock solid case here. Ain't no doubt about it. They are persecuting you. You went down to City Hall, you went down to Mellon Bank, and nobody wanted to talk to you. Nobody talked to your children down there singing in front of the Mellon Bank. That's persecution. And the reason why they're doing it is because of your religious beliefs. They're persecuting you because of what you believe. They're persecuting you because of the Bible. My friends, it's a slam dunk. I said it's a slam dunk. It's a slam dunk. So I just want to let you know that. You hear me now say, well, I need to get. So we have potentially two lawsuits. One I will file on my own, that they persecuted me personally. And then they persecuted the church. So there's two lawsuits. But for the one for the church, in New York State, a corporation cannot be represented by a non-attorney. You have to be a licensed attorney to represent a corporation. I thought I would share that with you. But I believe I can prove in court that there's a relationship between Eric Adams and the Mellon Bank, and it is on. I'm James David Manning, everybody. I'm the Lord's servant. And I thought I told you to never forget it.